Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Ecosystem is a private equity-backed digital research and advisory platform based in Sydney, Australia. They bring together tech buyers with tech providers and industry analysts into a single platform that helps to improve decision-making. Audrey William is a principal advisor at Ecosystem, and she has a multidisciplinary role, so she sometimes analyzes CX, but she can also be found writing about outsourcing or unified comms. Audrey recently published a research paper looking at contact centers last year, and I called to explore this paper and some of the key trends she's observing in her research. Audrey, thanks very much for being on the podcast. I know, we had to juggle some of the times for this because I'm in Brazil and you're in Australia. But I wanted to ask you about the research that you published, I think right at the end of last year. It was on the contact center trends in 2019. Would you be able to sort of outline some of the key findings in that research, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark, and thank you. It's great to be here and on your show, and also congratulations on the launch of the CX Files podcast book. That's all very exciting. So yeah, just I think late last year, I think we produced this CX trends report, but recently, I think just a couple of weeks ago, we worked on this report on the emergence of app or messaging, the messaging platform in delivering CX. So this is a report I put together that really talks about, how apps or messaging platforms are important channels that cannot be ignored anymore by customer-focused organizations. So, for example, you can talk about serving your customer today through many different channels, but if your customers are gravitated to their mobile devices and they love being on social messaging platforms, then you really need to think about how you're going to deliver customer experience through these channels. So that report, Mark, it explores case studies of how organizations are driving personalized CX through these channels, and I guess also what tech buyers should consider when delivering CX through these platforms.
Okay, yeah, and I noticed that one of the focuses in the report was around how do you get multi-channel CX right. And could you just explain how you're defining what is great multi-channel CX, and maybe give a couple of examples that you used?
Yeah, sure. So, multi-channel CX is really looking beyond the traditional, contact center channels, beyond voice, email, SMS, web chat. But as I alluded to earlier, it's about now experience within the app or the social media channel. So, most of us today, we're so used to using, various apps, whether it is for the banks we bank with, service providers, airlines, and the apps we use, a lot of them are actually very static in nature. So what that means is, you can go to the app, check your balance, you can check your points transfer, you can check your points, you can transfer funds, but it's not really giving you that greater interaction. So for example, if my bank, they know that through my debit card, or credit card, I'm spending, let's say, on fuel, groceries, dining out at these restaurants, they can make the app interactive, to also say, hey, here's a chart to show how your spending has changed in the last 3 months, so a customer might say, hey, that's really cool, and it's great because now I can manage my expenses. And if you look at the fintechs today, their platforms provide you with dashboards that have rich analytics, and it generates all these good charts and dashboards to see how you're spending, let's say, on groceries, and then they will suggest through a prompt within the app to say, hey, would you want to use some of these extra funds to put it into this trading account? It could be $1 or it could be $50, and they help you grow your revenue. But I think it's more like how they are trying to engage in a clever way cleverly with the customer. So it's about how can I drive great CX, and they've also, and I think this is an important point, cleverly thought about user design and experience. So UX is something that cannot be ignored. So I think the app and innovating around driving CX within the app is important. But Mark, the other area that really needs to be addressed, and you don't see many brands doing this yet or organizations, is that with social messaging platforms. So you have platforms like WhatsApp, and in Asia like WeChat, Line, and then you have Messenger. So you can't ignore these channels because a lot of your customers are using these channels on a daily basis, and we know what it's like when you have to today people try and not write a long email to a friend or a family member. In fact, they rather do that through an app or send someone a WhatsApp message. And if it's really important, they'll say, "Hey, let's get on a call to talk about this." So I think it's how our minds are tuned now to this new way of having something quick, fast, and at our fingertips. And if you look at that, similarly, I think brands must start delivering services to customers through these platforms. Because if that's what consumers are doing on a daily basis, then that's what they should do. And another good example is like a friend of mine, he was in Bali recently, and he said he was on a prepaid plan with his service provider, and he ran out of credit, so he wanted to top up and spend like a few $100s to make international calls from Bali. And he said all he wanted to do was just have a quick chat about the plans and the packages, but ask one or two simple questions to the agent. And he said it would have been great if the telco could allow him to make a quick call in such a situation or an emergency through WhatsApp, because he said he could have done that easily through, by entering a cafe or going to a hotel. And when you got connectivity, then, the telco can say, hey, you can just, we'll verify you, but then you can just call us, and have that quick chat. So he's saying that it's ways like this that companies have to think about personalizing the service through these channels. So, so to your point earlier, getting multi-channel right now, is beyond the traditional channels. It's really starting to personalize that experience through some of these channels, and that's the app that you're using a fair bit, but also through these social messaging platforms.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're talking about the platforms because in Brazil, certainly, they control everything. I can talk to my bank manager, I can talk to my barber, I can talk to my local supermarket, and everything is on WhatsApp. So it's interesting that you were saying that a lot of the actual branded apps that we download are fairly static because, clearly, like you were just saying at the end there, one of the key trends we're seeing is that people are demanding personalization. So how are the brands keeping up with that? If the apps we download are fairly static and limited, but people want a more personal service. I mean, who's actually doing this well?
Yeah, sure. I think it's still very early days, but I'm starting to see some of the airlines, some of the global airlines starting to do this well, where they offer this personal touch for change in flight. So if you want to get onto another flight or your flight was canceled, but you need to speak to someone, and you can now actually reach that airline through actually some of these social messaging platforms. And a good example is KLM. They were one of the first airlines to embrace this. For example, they use WhatsApp to personalize the service with their customers, and I think they were one of the first brands to test this API back in 2017. And so, with a simple customer opt-in, while purchasing tickets, KLM sends, booking confirmations, flight status updates, but they've personalized that whole experience. And I'm starting to see a lot of airlines, like in Asia, for example, they want to now, especially if you're serving customers in Asia, you just think about it, they would really appreciate it if you could personalize that service through, let's say, China is a big market for your airline, then WeChat becomes a very important channel. Other industries, I would say, I'm seeing retail and e-commerce as well. They have a way of notifying the customer. Let's say if you've purchased, some flowers. Let's say, like, I think 1-800-Flowers in the U.S. They do this well. So they will then send a photo or attach a photo before something has left the delivery center. Some companies are doing that now. And then let's say if it reaches the customer, and in this case, if it's flowers or chocolates, like with 1-800-Flowers, they actually then tell the sender, hey, the goods have been delivered, and here's a photo. But they attach it in a very good way, through they could personalize it through WhatsApp, Messenger, and some brands now, they even embed bots into just say some very basic things to the customer that, hey, it's all taken care of. So I think you're starting to see some brands now really innovate, because they are starting to realize as well that whilst the traditional channels are very important, it's very important to start looking at these new innovative ways of delivering the service. So another good example is, I think, companies that sell devices or appliances, like let's say vacuum cleaners. They have barcodes attached to the device. And if something goes wrong, you can always give the agent the number on the device. And it's quite brilliant today. Some of them, they can immediately know what has gone wrong with your appliance or vacuum cleaner. The warranty, when you purchased it, maybe faults you would have had when you called the contact center previously. So then they can just notify the customer through WhatsApp or an SMS to say, hey, you can just go to the nearest post office, put it in a bag, and we'll take care of it. And actually, Dyson does this very well. And in Australia, for example, if something happens, there's a fault in your vacuum cleaner, that's exactly what they tell the customer. And the customer just goes to the post office and they show them this thing that they received from Dyson. This document, through SMS, or it could be through, another platform. And the post office immediately knows what to do. So Dyson, they've clearly thought about simplifying the experience for the customer without too much hassle, just one SMS or email, but then linking that to logistics to really drive a good experience for the customer. And you can only imagine how companies can innovate around this to go even further to do that within the app or the social messaging platform.
Yeah, and there really seems to be a difference between companies that design their entire service around the app, that sort of sits at the center of the customer experience. For example, look at a lot of the fintechs or Uber or Airbnb. The app sits there right at the center of the experience. But how can more traditional banks or airlines learn from this? Because they all seem to just have the app as a nice optional extra.
Yeah, sure. That's a really good question, because you like you rightfully said, you see the fintechs really innovating to personalize that experience for you, and the banks are clearly starting to learn from the fintechs to say, hey, how can I make my interface on the app to have a better design so the user interface is compelling, and more of my customers or the millennials will be attracted to banking with us, And so with some banks, the apps today, you can see that they're poorly designed, or they just, they're just looking at it from the angle of just the product and just putting the app there for the customer. But where it is really important is where human psychology is applied to the design. It's about minimizing asking the customer to fill in many details, or with one or two clicks within the app or the social messaging platform, you can see the options for various things to choose from, and then you hit that link, and then it just triggers off some service you need, like what you see with Uber, like you said, and Airbnb. So I think it's very important to get the design and the UX important. So if you look at some of these companies who've done it well, they've spent a lot of time thinking about UX. And if you are, looking for feedback, let's say, from the customer after the service has been delivered through the app or social messaging platform, then you can just send them a very simple pop-up with an emoji, to just make it very easy for them. So simplicity and making the app intuitive, that's very important.
Okay, and I know that we talked a little bit about the apps and app design and UX, but we started this conversation talking about your contact center research. And I wanted to ask you something about that because, in the last few years, we've seen much more of a focus on customers actually having conversations, building a relationship, a sort of a regular interactions with brands. And this is very different to the old idea of a contact center being somewhere that you call just to complain. And the traditional the traditional metrics would be how quickly do we get the customer off the call, and can we answer their problem immediately on the first call. So how do all these metrics fit with a more modern kind of building a relationship with the customer, kind of that sort of ongoing customer journey that might last several years?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is something I talk about a lot these days, actually, when getting into contact center CX discussions, and you're right. Rather than the agent worrying about a metric like AHT, the agent should actually be praised if the call took 30 minutes or more and the problem was solved, and the customer is also more likely to buy from the company. So you've got the upsell part solved, but you've got a satisfied customer. So, some of these traditional metrics, Mark, like AHT, they should be used in conjunction with AI-powered, sentiment analysis, because whilst you have that metric, what is also very important to understand is the customer's tone of voice, the customer's emotion. So the length of the call may be long, but if you can sense that the customer was asking questions, asking about the products, and also from the tone of the customer's voice, you can always tell whether they were happy or frustrated, and that you're likely going to get something from them and probably more business from them in the future. That has to be weighed carefully with the metrics, rather than just saying, hey, you've only got 10 minutes or 20 minutes and then you have to end the call. And I think the same will apply with NPS. To your point, because like you said, it's always that you get asked to take part in this survey about how the product or service was after the call, when so many problems would have happened along the way of the customer's journey. And so, I think a lot of organizations are starting to explore and understand more about how they can proactively solve the customer's problem before they actually even give that bad rating. And so this is where customer journey analytics becomes really important. And I'm starting to hear a lot about that in the market and get a lot of feedback around that. So, for example, there's a company, Local Measure. I spoke to their CEO, not too long ago, and they've cleverly designed this app whereby, if the customer goes to the hotel and they check in, and after they've logged on to the Wi-Fi and then they opt in, the Local Measures developed this app whereby it pops up on the customer screen, and the customer just needs to answer by clicking an emoji, whether they're happy, sad, or frustrated. They've got a few emojis just to say how that check-in experience was. So if the customer, let's say, rated it to be average or they were really frustrated, the moment they click on that, it just triggers someone from front desk to know something has gone wrong, but it can also potentially trigger off it can send the alert to the contact center. And so what that means is now they know there's a problem. They know this customer was unhappy. So they might send the GM of the hotel to ask the customer, hey, what's gone wrong? And, and throughout that process, they might say, hey, we'll make sure that this is taken care of. But they'll also say, tonight you can dine at our hotel for free. That's an example. And the customer is really happy about that. And maybe the next day they might get a call from the contact center agent just explaining certain things, but saying, if you want, this service again, or you're not happy with this, we'll make sure that this guy will come to your room to solve this problem. So all of a sudden, what's happened here is you've had a frustrated customer, and rather than take this feedback after they've left the hotel, which by then the customer would have given it a bad rating or gone to TripAdvisor or some other platform on social media or Instagram to really write about this poor experience and how they will never go back to that hotel again, the organization has done a good job now by actually arresting the problem very early in the journey of the customer. And by doing that, the hotel has actually gone the extra mile to not only solve the customer's problem, they've delighted the customer by giving them, free vouchers, free meals. The GM has personally come to say sorry. And so when that customer checks out, let's say after their stay there for a week, the front desk, staff will always ask you, hey, how's your stay been? And the customer will say it was great, and thank you for looking into all our things, and we will likely come back to the hotel. And so you've solved so many problems, but you've also arrested the problem, and now your customer will come back to the hotel. So that's an example, Mark, of how customer journey analytics is starting to become very important, whereby you can proactively now understand through analytics or data how the customer feels about something, and the agent can always call the customer and proactively say, hey, Mark, we've noticed that, you wanted this flight, but, we're going to make sure that we get you onto this, and we'll send you that message through your through WhatsApp. So that's an example. And I think I'm hearing a lot more about this today in my conversations, and I think this is going to be a very important area in the CX space.
So you were just saying there about customer journey analytics, and I think that's really interesting. I mean, we're no longer talking about customer service as an action of post-purchase complaint, for example. I mean, don't we really need to know here about why customers are getting in touch with a brand and when they do it? I mean, is that what your clients are really talking to you about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this, and that's where it ties down to also what you said earlier about AHT or, some of the other metrics like NPS. It's, the industry has been, for a long time, this is what everyone has been looking at. It's always about when you've got a problem, you pick up the phone and you call the call center. When you're not happy with your service provider, you call your call center. When something has gone wrong, you call the call center. And now you're starting to hear organizations say, hey, we're losing so many customers because we're always talking to them about their problems. And by then they would have, been angry. They would have gone to TripAdvisor. They would have gone to Instagram. They would have complained about it to their friends. So is this post-call or post-experience parts that really need to be looked at, and it's always been that. That's been the industry for the last 15, 20 years. It's always been about after the experience. So now you've got customers now developing solutions to help organizations really arrest the problem, as I alluded to in the earlier example, around how we can now as a brand, better understand our customers, better understand their journeys, better understand their frustrations or what they potentially like or what they really, liked about that experience. And when we can do that very early in the journey of the customer, then for us, if we're a bank or a big brand out there, it just means we've delighted the customer, but we also know now how to tailor certain products or services to suit their needs. So I think what we're going to see in the future is a lot of innovation around that journey of the customer, and I think moving away from just that post experience has to be really looked into by organizations. So it's really about the journey, but also understanding problems if they have occurred very early in that journey of the customer's experience with the brand.
Okay, that's fantastic. I know that during this conversation we've talked about improving apps and increasing personalization and being able to analyze the customer journey more effectively. But what would you say is your next big CX research project for 2020 then?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually working on a paper on right now, and actually it just got published yesterday on what challenges the financial services sector is facing with regards to CX, and I guess how they have to innovate to stay relevant and some of the great learnings they can take from the fintechs. And I think I spoke about some of those points today. And the other paper, I think, that I'm working on right now, which will be published next week or the week after, will be around customer journey analytics and an interview I had with one vendor in and how important it is for organizations now to understand that end-to-end journey of the customer is going to be very important. So it's no longer just about the contact center, but it's about linking the contact center to some of these other processes along the way. And you're starting to have a lot of startups and some amazing vendors in this space coming out with products to help organizations address these issues. So Mark, these are the two papers I'm working on. So yeah, one has been published and one will be published most likely next week.
Okay, so thanks very much, Audrey. That was really insightful, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of that new research.
Hey, great. Thanks, Mark. And, it's really great to be on your show. And, I look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you for having me here today.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm at Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.